welcome everybody. Thanks, Paul. That was a perfect tee-up for what we're going to talk about now, because this time last year I moderated a panel session for on messaging, and it was more about best practice, grey routes, things like that. It's quite bad-tempered at times, so it was quite enjoyable for that reason. But this year we're going to be a bit more forward-looking and progressive and think about where the industry can go. And so I'm going to ask these guys very, very briefly to introduce themselves. No long biographies, please. We'll start at the end with Mr. Nexmo.
So hi, I'm David Vigar. I'm the head of carrier partnerships at Nexmo, the Volage API platform.
My name is Jay Emmett. I'm the GM at OpenMarket.
I'm Dror Oren. I'm one of the co-founders and VP of product with Casisto.
Kevin Redmond. I'm head of global sales for Telco Analytics and IBM.
Hi, James Lasbrey, global head of messaging for Telefonica.
Good, excellent. Okay, so interesting week for messaging. I'm going to start by embarrassing Jay. I can see Asheen there, head in his hands. This time last year, a few months ago, I interviewed Jay in connection with the Future Guide to Messaging, e-guide, which Gabriella mentioned and which we published at Christmas time. He was a great interviewee. We had a very frank exchange. I asked him about RCS. He wasn't that positive about it. It was fair to say. And then he's just told me a few minutes before we came on that shortly after, of course, he was invited to take part in the new Google enterprise partnerships for RCS. So it's picking up some momentum now. Sorry to embarrass you like that, but anyway, I just wanted to ask you, first of all, tell us a little bit about, I'm sure you all know, but just briefly what RCS is and what this program's all about.
So you'll have to work harder than that to embarrass me.
Okay, well I will then in that case. I'll make some notes.
I'm challenging you. Fundamentally, RCS at Google is around bringing a richer experience within the context of a messaging interface. So in some ways, it's similar to what I'll call an app-like experience, but inside an SMS session, so that it can bring attributes like alternatives, buttons, options, upgrades, cross-sell, upsell, resell, but basically to offer the consumer options in the context of whatever journey or transaction they're involved in. So it does have some very cutting-edge functionality, but I'll touch back on the reason that I originally spoke in the context. I believe SMS is unique amongst all engagement methods. It works on every handset, on every network. That's attribute number one. Every human being is a trained user. That's attribute number two. And it has a psychological component of immediacy where people read them. They don't let them queue because they know it's important. My email queues, my voicemail queues, my Snapchat queues, my Facebook queues, my SMS does not queue. So if you need a use case that offers that global ubiquity, today it's SMS. But in the context of RCS, it's beginning to offer a richer feature set so that it can provide a more engaging transaction.
So I've had a look at one of the works in progress with Virgin. Maybe you can explain, just so that people get an idea of what RCS can do, actually walk us through how it works with the Virgin Ticket project.
Sure. So one of our customers is Virgin Trains, and they send people a text message about what platform their train's going to be on. So you remember how you have to stand in Marylebone, look at the screen, and when your platform comes on, it's a mad race. This allows Virgin actually to stage it so that high-value customers, cohorts that need more time, the elderly, special cases aren't caught in that rush. They can get advance notice. And oh, by the way, it will show you your seat. It will allow you to upgrade. It will allow you to order food, all within the context of the messaging session. You don't have to hop between your SMS client and an app. In fact, what it does is you don't need an app to have app-like functionality.
But what about if I'm a user? Okay, so I'm somebody who needs to get to the platform more quickly. At the moment, I get a text message saying your train is on platform 5, and I get it ahead of everyone else so I can beat the queues. How is the RCS experience different? What's inside the message that makes it different?
Well, because it allows them to know these different classes and cohorts of customers. That's all. It's right. We all love our phone. Who's had their phone number forever, right? It allows you to establish an identity build some history, and treat them in the way that you want to. It's
Yeah.
classic market segmentation. We have different offers for different classes of customers based on their needs.
Okay. So, James, where do you believe RCS is going as the operator on the panel? Are you confident that it can become SMS 2.0, as they sometimes call it?
I don't know whether it'll be RCS, but it certainly will be something. We see SMS evolving all the time, and we see the markets growing, which I think most of the audience here today can talk about the use cases that are actually driving that behavior. And Jay kind of mentioned the attributes and why that's happening. People are communicating differently, though, and the expectation around how they interact with brands in the future certainly will change to something like RCS. We're confident of that. We don't know when it will be. Telefonica's point on this, we have chosen not to invest yet. Clearly, we need critical mass. The investment is quite large, but when it becomes clear on the right solution for our customers, clearly we'll invest to make sure that you can provide and continue providing the relevant services that you do today.
So Paul's intro sort of implied that enterprises are moving over to OTT messaging because of the the richness of the medium. Is that something you're seeing? I mean, I personally, from a personal point of view, I don't get too many messages from enterprises on my OTT apps as compared to SMS at the moment. What are you seeing in the market?
We're not really seeing the movement. What we're seeing is rapid growth in SMS. We're seeing brands using SMS more. We're seeing new use cases coming through. We're also seeing new brands from sectors who they're not the kind of trailblazers in terms of technology, now really adapting to and using SMS in innovative ways. Are OTTs looking at it? Yes. Is it a business service yet? Probably not. It's doing really well from a consumer perspective, but we're not seeing that translate to business in kind of any kind of scale.
What about you, David? Because you're sort of, in the middle, agnostic about all this.
Yeah, I mean, we provide an API for enterprise to connect into either the SMS channel or a number of the OTT channels. Certainly the OTT channel for enterprise engagement hasn't taken off maybe like we'd hoped it would. I think WeChat to Tencent mentioned earlier, I think that's probably one of the biggest success cases in China. If you look at Chinese consumers, they do a lot of their enterprise engagement through WeChat. We haven't really seen that with the other OTT platforms such as Line, Viber, who have opened up to the enterprise community. I think one of the things that's going to start driving consumers, and I think it's consumers that will lead that drive, whether it's to RCS or whether it's to the OTTs or whether it's to something else. I think the thing that's going to drive that is how those channels can interact with each other. We all have different methods of how we want to talk to our brands. I hate calling brands. I hate sitting on hold because I would like to be doing something else at the time. I quite like to tweet them and then have them kind of come back to me. But you can't do everything on Twitter. Sometimes you have to start the conversation there and then move across to somewhere else. The biggest challenge there is that context is completely lost when you go from Twitter to having to call them. And I think that when we can really bring that context across as we move channels, that's going to really drive consumers to start picking up different channels as the way they communicate with their brands. And
so what's preventing that cross interoperability from working? Is it a technical thing? Is it a business model thing? Can it be solved?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's something we're working on at the moment on the technical side. We should have something fairly soon, and obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on a few of those things because you actually have to have a continuity from, let's say, from a consumer experience point of view. You have to understand from somebody walking into a shop, they started browsing, having a look at something, but you want to have a continuity when they start to look at that same things on their handset, from when they then call into the agents, when they do some web browsing later on. You have to have a continuity and understand everything that has gone on before that. It's not very easy. It's pretty complex, but we're getting there. We're getting there. There's some examples where we're trying to work on that. It's quite simple from some of the virtual agents and from the website piece, but tying in, for example, the client store experience to then the virtual store experience, that's tricky.
Okay, so Draw, we've heard a little bit about chatbots already, and that is kind of all the rage in terms of what OTT messaging can bring. So you're designing these things. what's your experience so far of how consumers and enterprises have adopted them?
Yeah, so it's funny because we sell to banks. Mainly we focus on financial institutions. That's our main market. And when we talk to most of the banks, to be honest, SMS, RCS or whatever is actually not that high on their list. They typically would look on other channels and how they can be kind of like omni-channel, and they don't look at messaging as a channel. They actually look now at conversation as a channel. And how can we offer a conversation and sort of carry through the different touch points? So you're mentioning if I'm going to the website, I want to be able to ask a question and get an answer and get maybe continue the same interaction on SMS. And nobody here mentioned Facebook Messenger, which is kind of surprising because that's the probably biggest one platform, and if you add to that WhatsApp, really the biggest kind of like company that is offering more and more services and all these things that RCS is coming. That's kind of like last year's stuff for Facebook Messenger. So banks are definitely looking at this, and I think, like I said, I think they're looking at a conversation and natural language conversation. How can they offer this kind of conversation across, multiple channels? There are still many, many challenges, right, with offering that on, messaging and others. An obvious one is security, or at least perceived security. And actually, in this case, SMS is perceived as more secure than others for some reason.
So, you're working with MasterCard. Why don't you just walk us through how a chatbot session might go with MasterCard?
Yeah, so we announced in October in Money 2020 what's called MasterCard Kai, and that's basically a bot that, together with MasterCard, we go and sell to banks. And the idea there is that the user gets authenticated, opens a session, and can interact with the bank on Facebook Messenger. And if you go, you can ask questions about your transactions, about your bank accounts. You can, ask questions like, well, I'm going to come back home and I'm going to ask, how much have I spent in Barcelona, last week? Or how much did I spend on Uber in 2015? Or what was my largest, restaurant transaction, last year? But also things that are more proactive around that. So, we know how to go back and actually say, looks like you're interested in hotels. You want me to, show me a promotion. So MasterCard has what's called Priceless, which is their big kind of like promotions business. So that becomes proactive on top of, these kind of conversations. So the idea is to have it, offer value around, obviously, customer support. So enterprises are looking at that, that's cost savings, but also adding more and more experiences that go beyond to lifestyle banking and others.
And how many are customers using it? What do they like about it?
Yeah, so I can't really talk about MasterCard. I can tell you that there's a few things that I can tell you. We're actually live in Asia, so you guys were mentioning WeChat and Tencent, and obviously Asia is moving very, very fast. We're live in Singapore, India, Indonesia with a bank called DBS. It's the largest bank in Singapore. And they also launched their first mobile bank in India, which actually has an assistant. And that's an interesting story, right? Because they started with a virtual assistant on their app, and then later on extended the same conversations into the web, and then the same conversations, they just announced Facebook Messenger in Singapore, and that's how kind of like they extend the conversation. So I can't talk about how many people are using it. I can tell you, on average, people use more, Facebook. They ask more about their discretionary kind of like, spending. People like to kind of like look at it. And one interesting kind of like piece of information is our average interaction is about 11 kind of like back and forth. So that's a very long conversation if you think about it, right? People ask something, they get something back. So it's a pretty sticky and kind of like engaging kind of channel, especially if you compare it to others.
Can you do chatbots on SMS?
Yeah, in the US, we announced our own kind of like small consumer bot. It's called MyKai. You can actually go and connect to it. Go to our website, casisto.com. There's a MyKai, and it's a small one that lets you connect into your bank account. And we offered SMS, Facebook Messenger, and Slack because we wanted to kind of like check. And surprisingly, most people opted in for Facebook Messenger. I think we have something like 30% on SMS. Right now, because of the limitations, the experience is kind of like, is less exciting. You cannot, for me, I'm a purist, right? I really like the conversation. I think it highlights our technology, so I like the fact that we can showcase it on SMS and give you everything. Mm-hmm. You can argue that adding all these buttons and rich media actually makes our lives a little easier because you don't need to handle all this conversation. Yeah, so you can do that. I mean, it's...
So Kevin, while we're on AI, You guys are, you have this huge brain in the sky called Watson. Why don't you explain a little bit about Watson is and then how it works with mobile messaging?
Nice, simple question.
Well, you should have a good answer for that by now, I would hope.
Well, so, I mean, Watson is basically taking machine-based learning together with natural language interpretation, and it's based up in the cloud. And as you would have seen, many people, a few years ago, obviously, Watson competed in Jeopardy. That's what a lot of people got some notice for, winning the Jeopardy competition. Since then, you've seen us using the Watson capabilities to do things such as scanning images from healthcare, from cancer treatments and things like that, reading all the entire literature that there is in the world around cancer studies, etc., and using that and putting that technology into the hands of the doctors and pediatricians and other people to actually help solve cancer. And very, very good success rate on that. Since those days, we've actually leveraged the tool for banking. There was a lot of investment banks using the same kind of technology in order to digest all the investment reports, news reports, weather reports, everything possible to understand potential impact on stock prices and wealth management programs for people. Since those days, we've actually progressed even further. Now it's doing things such as very smart lifts. We're doing very smart stores and shopping. There's even if you want to have some fun, go and have a look at Watson Cooking. You can put in 5 or 6 ingredients that you find in your fridge, and it'll come back with about 15 or 20 nice little recipes and exactly how to cook it based on everything there. It'll tell you the time and place. So it's got some clever little things, and we're taking that same level of machine learning into the wider consumer space. Now, when you're applying it to, for example, messaging or chatbots, we've launched a product called the Virtual Agent, and effectively that is specialized at the moment for telco operators. It digests all the potential plans, marketing plans, technological language, so particular to whichever operator, and we can use that to have an interaction in native language with your consumers. I think the team has mentioned a number of times people want to communicate in various platforms, and it's becoming more and more popular to actually use the bot as a platform. So SMS possible, but also on a dedicated virtual agent. So we're using that artificial intelligence to get smarter and smarter and smarter with each interaction, understand more around what we can sell, when we can sell it, how we can sell it, issues that are arising, and also trying to do smarter things. So actually putting into the hands of the consumers a lot more information around the network performance, network issues, or network changes in plans, so they can actually automatically have their dialogue with the chatbot, understand that there may be an issue with the network at the moment, but the team is fixing that, or this might be an issue with your version of app that you're using or your handset, and what you can do about that, as well as doing simple things like changing your plans and things like that. So it's developing. It's developing quite a lot.
So if again, because I'm a bit of an idiot and I like to kind of imagine things in pictures. So let's say I text OpenTable and say I want to book such and such a restaurant, and they are plugged into Watson somehow. How does my request to OpenTable, how is that improved, and how are the results delivered back to me improved by what you do?
Well, it's
or is
more.
That a terrible example?
It's just one piece of it, right? So we would actually know where you did that SMS, what time you did that SMS, potentially, other things that you were doing at the same time. Were you also on the website? Were you doing, what kind of behavior are exhibiting there? Based on that, we can also now say, well, you tend to always book your restaurants using this medium at this time from these locations. Why don't we monetize that to try to actually start sending you some advertisements and say there's a brand new restaurant opened, or there's this new restaurant, or there's this offer potentially, and send it in the same medium around the same kind of time as you would be doing things. So we can learn from your behavior. Plus also we can learn from the behavior of the other people that you communicate with. So maybe you're a leader on that, but there's always, you're always doing lunch, and you're always doing lunch with these 4 people as well. Okay.
So tell me why that's not a privacy nightmare.
It can be. It can be.
Tim,
Depends
let's
upon the
call that
country.
out for a second, because I'll say something provocative about OTT messaging apps. Let's remember how Facebook and Snapchat and WhatsApp make money. They sell ads based on scrubbing your data. So if I'm talking to my car insurance company about crashing my car, Facebook is scrubbing that conversation, and I guarantee you Mark Zuckerberg is going to send me an ad for a competitor in the next 2 minutes. I know when my message is on Telefonica that they're not doing that. So I don't have any brand problems there. So I urge all of us to remember, people are like, oh, Facebook chat is free. No, it's not free. It gets paid for either on an advertising model or like SMS on an explicitly priced model. So let's all keep that in mind. I am sure MasterCard, when I have a conversation with them, they don't want Facebook selling my data to Visa to send me an ad.
Yeah, and I'm not undermining this. I think it's a major issue. However, first of all, Telefonica also makes money. Let's put it out there, right? And
Not with my data.
with your data as well, even if they're using it themselves, right? They're not necessarily selling your data. I mean, I'm happy to hear your opinion about that. But I think, for us, again, for us it doesn't matter, to be honest. We offer that on Facebook or in the app or in the web. It's not that we don't, and I'm sure IBM, would agree, and everybody who creates a bot, we don't push the customers to Facebook. We actually tell them it's the same thing for us, and they come back and ask to implement that on Facebook. And I think the way I look at it, and kind of like as an industry, I think that you're right. There's a huge tension, and I think that there's a big, there's an interesting kind of like conversation going on right now, where on one hand you hear, Zuckerberg, but you also hear, Satya Nadella from Microsoft, and you hear, Sergey from Google talking about them becoming, the enterprise channel, right? From Skype to Messenger, from, the Google, whatever, all kind of assistants to Amazon Echo, they all want to become an enterprise channel. And they will have to solve this issue of trust between the enterprises and consumers. So I'm not undermining that. I do think that, it's a major thing, and they'll have to solve that. I can tell you that, in the last F8, which is the Facebook big, developers event that happens, every year, last April, they announced Platform Messenger, and they actually said that they're not going to be offering any ads on platform for now. So this is, again, I'm not defending Facebook, and I don't care if banks are implementing on Facebook or not. But I do think that if they want, and specifically, and I think Messenger and WhatsApp, I think WhatsApp is the more interesting kind of like story here, that hasn't opened up to APIs and will open up, I'm sure, in the future. They will have to figure it out. And you're right, there's a huge trust issue that, the operators were able to kind of like, establish, and these guys have not been.
David, what do you think the future of WhatsApp is, given that Facebook Messenger, it was always clear that it was going to be, they're going to try and turn it into a WeChat of sorts, but because of WhatsApp's heritage and user base and user behaviours, they don't seem to be going the same way with that. How do you think they will monetize it?
Certainly we saw them taking steps towards that. They did some proof of concepts. I think there's some airlines and a couple of banks in the US, and they have been very quiet on that since. I think it's going to be the consumer driver. I kind of have to challenge, I think, your viewpoint that the privacy thing is a problem. I think if you give consumers the choice of paying for something or freemium, I think a lot of them are going to go freemium. Actually, we see, side note, I came across a relatively young company who's offering a cheaper prepaid tariff if you receive some marketing, and they seem to be getting a lot of traction. I think that's...
But I don't think Jay's point...
It's not, I'm not talking about consumer privacy. Yeah. I'm talking about the brand losing its relationship with its client. I'll push the personal privacy to the side. It's the brand is at risk in the instance I'm describing.
Yeah, okay, I see that. With WhatsApp, I think we kind of have to wait and see. It might well be that the success or not of RCS might start driving Facebook to really do something proper with WhatsApp. Seems to me like they're sitting on the fence, kind of trying to see where everyone else is going before they really commit to how they monetize that. So I don't really have an answer for you on that one yet, but more of a wait and see.
So we've been talking a bit about big data and that kind of thing. So James, you've got a few projects in Telefonica that are trying to, make responsible use of big data. I think Smart Digits or Luca, I can't remember what the actual name for it is at the moment. You can clarify for us. But maybe you could explain a little bit about how you're planning to bring that to bear in the messaging space and why we shouldn't be scared of it in the way that we've just been talking about.
Okay. So the first point in terms of being scared of this, most of the data is out there already and is being used, right? So this is SIM data that is available. What we're talking about is specific propositions around SIM swap, device swap, location, data that we can overlay on an SMS, which we know is the most effective means for a brand to communicate to its customer, which will mean that brands can actually expand the services that they offer their customers. We believe in Telefonica, if we can make the APIs available, and by the way, that isn't just as easy as it sounds, and then we can, as a market, make those available so you can effectively get those from each of the operators in the market. Aggregators will work with brands to find the right way of integrating those services with existing use cases. We believe this will then scale the market. I think there's a conversation here about over the top and threats. Actually, we don't see it that way. We see, one, none of those technologies can compete with SMS in the ubiquity and the way it can service any customer with any type of device. But actually, over the top and other technologies like Watson will actually enhance the experience. So actually, it will complement the use case. So I don't think we should necessarily be afraid. We should be ready and embrace the right technology when it becomes available.
So can you tell us, are you allowed to say yet what these platforms are called? I mean, it is on the record. I think Smart Digits, Luca, it's all out there. Can you explain a little bit about what they do?
Yeah, so...
How far along they are anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's confidential. Luca is our data business. So we obviously launch a different part, which is about the consumer data, but giving the data back in the right way and allowing customers to decide what data they share. For Smart Digits, it's effectively just the SIM data and creating APIs. They've already launched that in the UK, and a lot of the banks are already using that. So these aren't new services. What we think is that the aggregator channel can effectively bring these to all of the markets and all of the customers to create the right use cases in the future. We can't do that just as ourselves. We need the channels to do that for us. So.
And what about other operators? Do you see this as a point of differentiation for Telefonica, or would you like all operators to offer something like this?
We're very open. So we've just had an event, a messaging event. We invited American Mobile to that. We recognise that actually if we're going to do anything in LATAM, we need to work together. We'll happily share all of our plans around kind of controlling fraud, and we'll happily share all of our plans around expanding our portfolio. We don't gain anything from doing it just by ourselves. We offer the services, and aggregators then add value and make them relevant for customers. So, yeah, we're very open about what we're doing, and hopefully you guys can provide the feedback around where we need to go in the future, and we'll adapt to that.
And you've just launched something called Project Aura. What? I mean, I don't think that relates to messaging. It's kind of like a smart assistant, isn't it? I know why you're laughing. It's out there. So I struggle to understand the proposition, I must admit. So maybe you can explain a little bit about that.
Yeah. To be honest, Aura isn't my area, right? So I can't comment on...
Though you do have an Aura.
Yeah, thank you. He's read that this morning, by the way. Jose Maria. Yeah. Jose Maria, someone said.
It was a note that he passed me.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Anyway, but yeah, Aura as a project is clearly part of Telefonica's move into data. Do I know all the rationale and what that project is? No. Do I think it's a good thing? Yes, of course it is. If you look at all the press, virtually all the press that I've read, there's not one that kind of says, oh, actually, consumers shouldn't be in charge of their data. So it's very powerful. It's a very powerful move by an operator. We hope other operators follow suit. We believe they will do. And we think that will transform the marketplace for customers.
What about, we haven't really talked about some of the, we've talked about OTT apps. What about something like Slack, David? Is this is not the only. There's more than one way to get a message to a user, especially in the enterprise space. So how important are those kinds of platforms?
Yeah, absolutely, very important. I mean, again, it comes down to how the consumer wants to engage with whoever they're engaging with, and if people would prefer to receive that communication on Slack. I mean, obviously Slack is very specific for internal engagement within companies. Then absolutely, that's an important channel for that purpose. We don't really feel that there has to be a particular channel that wins or that we should be pushing particularly. It's really about which are the channels that everyone wants to engage on, and it will be different channels. The channel I want to engage with people will be different to what James wants to engage with the same brand on. It's our job as the sort of aggregator in the community to give brands the ability to reach their consumers over whichever channel they would like to be reached on. And yeah, that can be things like Slack or Twitter or OTTs or traditional messaging.
Did you have something to add to that, Rob?
Yeah, so we also integrated and launched on Slack, and Slack was one of the kind of like early, easy to integrate with platforms. And I think, if you flip that from really the enterprise to the consumer, it's about choice, right? It's about the consumer's choice to be able to interact or engage with the enterprise everywhere they want. So if 3-4 years ago, banks, but also other enterprises, their whole marketing and kind of like channel strategies was about dragging you into the channel of their choice, which on the phone was their app, right? It was how do I capture you and move you to the app and give you like links and make you go to the app? What we try to do, and I think bots and conversation, natural language in general, lends itself into let's meet the user where they are and let's offer the same conversation where they are, and that may be again on Slack or on Messenger or on SMS or wherever, and it should be the same conversation. It does put a lot of the pressure, I must say, on the enterprises, because translating this conversation to different front ends and different clients is a very hard thing to do. But I think I always go and one kind of like good example for me is Netflix in the US, right? Everywhere you go, you access Netflix. You not only see your profile and everything the same, the same specific whatever picture or a movie that you're looking at starts from the same point, right? It's completely consistent given the specific client, and I think we need to look at these conversations from the same kind of like point of view. I want to continue the same conversation from the same place of my choice, not of the enterprise's choice.
Yeah, along those lines, there's a sort of an idea that the apps are going to become almost like mini app stores. It's like your rich experiences take place inside apps, and you don't really need to download a different app for every brand. Jay, what do you think about that thesis?
My perspective is that apps have failed except in a few narrow use cases right now. All right, banking is a great one, travel, maybe some curated content like sports. But otherwise, this was Virgin Train's problem. This is why they're using the RCS, or where they're so interested, because I won't even quote, on industry averages, 5 or 6% download over your user base, and a 90% abandonment rate. I've shut off all the messaging on the apps I have because the red bubbles made me anxious looking at them. And if I opened and read the 12 messages that Bank of America sent me today, they were not interesting to me. They were advertising. All right, so again, I'll come back to SMS and its 3 unique points. Works on every handset, every person is a trained user, and it has that psychological immediacy that you read it. My Slack account queues, okay? So if they send me a plain late alert there, I'm not going to see it.
Can I challenge you a little bit? Just to say, again, you are not kind of like the user that the banks are kind of like, no, optimize. I'm not, me too. No, maybe you are, but at least when we talk to banks, the typical, reference is to the millennials, right? I'm not one of them too. And they, actually don't do SMS. They just don't do SMS. The plain old SMS.
So I agree
they just
with you.
Don't do it.
On a P2P note, talking to your social networks, SMS is stopped, and I suspect Telefonica would agree with that in principle. No one text messages their friends or their social network. It's all gone over the top. I talk to my children via Snapchat, okay? But again...
If you send them an SMS, it will queue, right? They're just not going to look at it.
No, actually, it won't queue. They will read it. They will. They will read it. If I send it some,
They're very well behaved.
then not exactly. Again, I'll come back to it. I also think we over-rotate sometimes on some of these conversations that enterprises are having, right? Most of the time, I really don't want a conversation with Bank of America. I have a transaction or something that I need to do. I don't even like the term chatbot because it implies kind of a conversational, freewheeling chat. When I need a car quote, it's 8 questions. When I want to check on my airline, is it on time? It's 2 questions. I use the term service bots. You know, all robots are good at 1 or 2 things. It's one of the challenges of our time, right? The greatest technology challenge right now is to design a robot that can give a senior citizen a bath. Okay? So, how far away are we from that
I could not
today?
agree more, by the way, about the verticalized bot. I think it's all these generic assistants are actually doing a bad service to the industry, in my opinion. So I do agree.
So think about that. Think about when I'm buying a ticket, or I love the example of a car quote. It's 9 questions. I'll use a personal example. My son graduated from college 2 years ago. I said to him, call Geico and get a car quote. He's like, Dad, I can't be on the phone for 15 minutes.
I don't call.
But he would have done a 20-message session at his convenience, at his leisure, at his own specification. So again, they're very comfortable in what I'll call a stark messaging interface. My millennial and Gen X friends have grown up in that environment. They're quite comfortable. My son doesn't want to talk to anyone. They don't read their emails. So again, I'm not saying SMS is the solution for every use case across the globe, but I am saying it as a strong center of gravity for most enterprises' needs in terms of serving their customers.
Excellent. So have any of you millennials got a question for these gentlemen? Come on, someone must have. Yeah, this gentleman, this millennial at the front.
A question especially regarding brands. I'm Sandeep. I run a small company in messaging. We work only with enterprises. One of the biggest influencers that we have seen in the whole space is advertising agencies. And I think that's where the pitch has actually probably gone haywire in between for 3-4 years, when they focus too much on the rich media, and somehow I think now it's again come back to messaging. So what do you think is the role and how we can curate media agencies, especially because they control the budgets in a lot of cases, and how that has to be used, and how that ecosystem gets plugged into this whole environment? So I think that's one loose end that has not been tied up by a lot of years.
So the question was about in case anyone at the back couldn't hear it, it's about ad agencies and getting them to engage more with all of this. So who wants
Any
to take that one?
experience with?
Yeah.
So I'll speak up. I actually think SMS messaging, advertising is a poor use case for it. Top of the funnel activities, you're trying to drive discovery or awareness. No one likes getting messages from people they don't know. So most messaging from an enterprise perspective is around one of 3 facets, right? It's a 2-factor authentication, it's an alert you're interested in getting, or it's some type of service interaction that you have provoked. So I really don't have a good answer for that. Having said that, I have signed up for some things where I enjoy the brands, and they can use it as a channel. But top of the funnel activities, I probably wouldn't be a supporter of that.
So I think my question was not around advertising push. It was regarding the process design. Because in a lot of cases, ad agencies actually control the process of engagement. It was not around the ad spam.
Yeah. I think it's if you move back and look at kind of how an advertising agency defines its KPIs and what success is, it's very different to maybe the customer service. And actually, if you look at from a percentage perspective, marketing is probably less than 20% of messages that are sent. And I agree with the point in terms of messaging has to be relevant, it needs to be sent at the right time, and then it has its immediacy. People are looking at the message because they want that information. The point on kind of advertising, agencies focus on how can they improve a campaign, how can they get someone to react quicker, or targeting a certain demographic or group. Actually, how do they get a 5% kind of sign-up rate? These are fundamentally different KPIs to the ones that we look at. when the customer is trying to communicate, or a brand is trying to communicate to its customer, it wants to communicate to 98%, actually 100%. And it will get confirmation of when that's received. So I think it's got something to do with the KPIs that are set, but also the kind of use case that's being used. Does that make sense? A little bit.
Okay, this gentleman here in the middle. Yeah, with the glasses, that's you. Yeah.
I guess I have a question. What's the kind of opinion about what Google is doing? In that they're handling interactions from third parties as notifications. And in reality, there's three types of communications. Closed, open, like with the clients, and then public. Public is, my flight is late, go here. And Google, if you notice the way they've been changing their Android system is they deal with it in notifications. You show it shows up on the top bar, flight's late, or even coming to this, the ticket, shows up. I get my little, barcode or QR code for the event, and those are handled in a kind of a more direct way. What is your opinion about that? That is a different way to handle some of those channels.
I can try. I think Google took sort of the contextual element to a whole new level, right? I mean, and that is really driven by the amount of data that they have on all of us. If you have an Android, that's like, really amazing. If you don't, still, it's so. I personally like it. I think it's very useful. I'm not that worried about the public. You're right. I mean, they are blurring the line, and it was a little creepy for me. The first time I drove into the airport, and my boarding pass bubbled up on my phone was weird. But then you get used to it, and it's pretty useful, right? So I'm not. I mean, there might be different ways to look at the security element and the creepiness kind of like factor. I find it useful, and since I know Google has access to this data anyways, I might as well, have them make it useful for me than just sit on it. But that's a personal.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It's personal.
Yeah.
Some people are going to go off and buy their new Nokia phone, right? Because they don't want any of that.
Or because they're going to a music festival and they're worried about their
but but one thing you need to be aware of is the data is there. If you either use it or you don't, but the data is still there. It's not that they acquired a new set of data. They're just processing it better, right?
Yeah, but to go back to the premise, we're talking about a brand talking to its customer. So it's not Google making the decision.
Correct.
The brand is driving that.
But they're enabling that conversation. They're enabling it in
They're enabling it. My question would be, how do you judge the success of that? So Jay finds it really annoying, but you kind of don't mind it. Actually, how do you calibrate that as something that customers, all of them, want to receive at the right time, similar to SMS?
But I also think that some of it is not exactly the brand, actually. I think that there is actually a layer of the assistant that actually you can argue abstracts a lot of this and actually makes it easier for me to digest, because I get all of they are able to parse all of my boarding passes, and it doesn't matter if it's United or whatever, or Canada. I get all of them, and so I look at that as actually value that the Google Assistant brings to me, and not the brands.
But you did mention that you thought the general assistants were actually damaging the whole.
But we can have a discussion about it. I actually don't think that that's a general feature. I think that Google is actually very, very good at very specific things. So there's actually a New York Times article about somebody that took and tested, Alexa, Echo, Cortana, Google, Siri, and actually got to kind of like, the conclusion that they are not really generic. They are very good at very specific verticals. And Google, that's one of the things that Google is very good at. Actually, Siri is very good around travel and entertainment. Alexa is very good around shopping and music. So they are actually, if you look at them, they're really, really specific. And I think that's what Google does very well.
Okay, I think there was one more hand up. That person still want to, yeah? That's right.
Sorry, a lot of it James is still related to. I think what we're talking about is choice of communication, and whether you add RCS or however that develops and will evolve. But I think consumers are a very diverse group, and I think it's very difficult to say a consumer will do this, because as you've been talking about millennials, I'm the father of one, not a millennial, but that means that very similar to Jay, that I get pulled into that world because that's how they want to communicate with me. And I think it's a very similar thing with brands, is that it's all very well saying, you know, the RCS will kill all of SMS. There are people that, and within any interaction with the brand, there are things that you would prefer on an SMS, there were things that you would happily take in different forms of communication. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful that we're seeing one as the death of another, when I think it's just simply a matter of horses for courses, in terms of the interaction between the brand, the consumer, and the data's the same. I mean, one man's flowers, another man's weed. I mean, if it's not relevant to me, then it's a weed. But if it happens to hit me, it's something that's relevant. But I think, again, that's the risk we've got to get away from, is that one, everybody in this show is somewhat on the bleeding edge of technology, and we're all seeing everything as the birth or the death of everything else.
Yeah.
But I think, actually, you know, people still send faxes to each other, a lot of them a day, and you look at it and go, really? but you know, that serves a purpose. So I think, again...
It's the best way to tell your wife you want to divorce her.
Yeah.
Phil Collins did it anyway. Happily married, 25 years. Actually, there's just one quick question I wanted to ask. So, you know, bearing in mind what the gentleman's just said, what if, for argument's sake, something like Telegram or Wire gets incredibly popular and people start to use those kind of privacy-orientated apps? Does that have any impact on enterprise messaging? Go on, David, I'll throw that one at you. You're furthest away from me.
Well, I don't think any app is going to have that level of dominance. I mean, WhatsApp's the closest. I think that the utility you'll get out of that very closed environment will be limited enough that consumers won't be interested to use it for everything that they want to do in terms of their engagement.
Yeah.
You know, and I heard the point that, you know, SMS is still a much stronger channel for certain things. And I just don't think that consumers are going to view something like Telegram as the channel for all of that communication. I think there will still be what they want to do on text message and what they want to do on Twitter. I don't see that really taking over in entirety.
Okay, just for divorce messages to your wife then. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Okay, well, I think that's our time up. So it's a very entertaining session. Thanks for listening and enjoying it. And enjoy the rest of the show.